Welcome back to Grandpa and the Millennial. I am Natasha, the Millennial, and I am here with Anthony, who is the Grandpa.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back.
And before we introduce our guest, I do want to remind everybody to subscribe and follow and like all of our pages on Instagram and Facebook. It is Grandpa and the Millennial, and on LinkedIn, it is called Tell Us Your Story. We appreciate the engagement and the follows, and feel free to add comments, and can't wait to see those Inspire Thursdays.
Yeah, and I, as always, am very excited. So this is actually the second attempt at this. We had some technical difficulties last week. But today we're interviewing a United States Marine. She was a captain in the Marine Corps, which we'll talk about. And today she's a career coach, Talia Bastien Rhea. Welcome to the show again.
Thanks so much for having me again. I really appreciate you guys inviting me on. Excited for this.
I am too. I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation and hearing your story. And before we do, if you don't mind just taking a minute and tell us a little bit about where you're at in your career now and your role, and then we will go back to the beginning and follow your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a career coach for veterans turned corporate professionals. So I help veterans figure out their strategies to pursue their pipe dream. I'm a firm believer that in all of us, we have something that we're called to. And a lot of times, as we continue throughout our adult lives, we make decisions that are adult decisions, right? That are in the best interest of our families, or what we think society is telling us we should do or what we should want. And it leads to a lot of stress and pain and heartache. And ultimately, I think that everyone knows what they want to do, and sometimes they just need some clarity and the courage to pursue that thing. So that is what I do now. I help veterans, figure out what their calling is and make that their career.
Yeah, like I said, I'm really excited. Being a veteran myself, I look forward to pulling some of the layers of the onions and hearing everything that you're doing for the community. So why don't we start with where it all started? Tell us your story, where you grew up, who you grew up with, and how. We'll go through the entire journey through high school and college and how you got to where you're at now.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I grew up in Southern California. I was the oldest of 4 kids. And I had a pretty idyllic childhood, all things considered. I was homeschooled from pre-K all the way through to the end of high school. Yeah, I have 2 younger brothers and a younger sister, and we were all homeschooled actually up until junior high or high school. And then my youngest brother went to a private school. And even though I was good at school, I just didn't really enjoy it. I always thought that I just wanted to be done with school. Like, I loved literature and I loved English and I hated math and science. And so I told my parents, whatever I can do to be done with this as soon as possible would be great. And so thankfully, they heard what I was saying, and we figured out a way for me to be able to graduate high school early, which then enabled me to go to college early. So I was just kind of on a fast track through my academic, early academic career, but didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. And, right around the time I was getting ready to graduate from college, I had always thought about the Marine Corps. And, I kind of just started Googling, what is a Marine? What is a Marine officer? I got suckered into a YouTube OCS promotional video. And, 90 minutes later, I went downstairs and I was like, Mom, I figured out what I'm going to do after college. She's like, oh, yeah, what's that? I'm like, I'm going to join the Marine Corps and become an officer. And she just looked at me in that moment. She's like, no, you're not. And that's the most surefire way to ensure that I do whatever the opposite is that someone tells me to do. So
well, let's dive into that for a minute. So I'm curious. So overachiever by far, starting, graduating high school early and then going to college early.
Yeah.
But what drew you to the Marine Corps? So I know you said you started looking at, but what was it about the Marine Corps versus any of the other services?
Because it was the hardest, or it had the reputation for being the hardest. And, I was very competitive growing up with sports, have a competitive nature. I am the firstborn. I like to say I'm a recovering perfectionist and overachiever. So I think I just had that as a personality tendency in general. But then I was also, really impacted by 9/11. I was 7 when that all went down, and it left a very significant impression on me. I remember going to church the next day and seeing adults crying, on the floor, and just, it was packed, and it remained packed for months after that. And I was too young to understand what it all meant, because I was 7, but I knew that something really significant had happened, and I knew that there were bad guys, and I wanted to be on the side of the good guys, right? And that's like a very rudimentary level understanding for a 7-year-old, but that impression stayed with me. And, growing up, I'd watch war movies, and it just moved me. And then the Marines were always, the few, the proud. I watched the commercials and everything. Great PR stunts, but it resonated, and I wanted to be the best, and I was already a high achiever, and so call it half patriotism and half masochism just really attracted me, and really none of the other services existed to me. I never even entertained the possibility of joining another service.
So take us through your college before you got to the Marine Corps. Did you have any idea of what you wanted to do, and what were you studying?
Yeah, great question. So I was an English and communications major. Again, I liked literature. I was a huge English lit nerd, but I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do career-wise. I toyed with the idea of being a lawyer because I like to argue, but I hated research. And so I realized very quickly that I couldn't be a lawyer and despise research. I thought about being a teacher at one point. I thought about getting into politics at one point. So I was just kind of all over the map, but I didn't really have like a cohesive idea as to what I wanted to do. I just knew that I wanted to get college over and done with as soon as possible and kind of move on with my life. And I know college is a big deal to a lot of people, but I think that the way that our education system is just set up nowadays, unfortunately, college has been reduced to a piece of paper that you need to prove to society that you're quote unquote intelligent. And for me, it was just get the stupid piece of paper, graduate, move on with your life, don't graduate with debt. So I was very fortunate not to do that. And I did distance learning. So because I had graduated early from high school, I was able to classes in what would have been my latter high school years, my senior and junior years. So by the time I graduated, technically at 18, I had my associate's degree. And then I was able to CLEP out of multiple units worth of general ed courses. And CLEP stands for College Level Educational Proficiency Test, something to that effect. But essentially, it's a pass or fail test where you study for an exam, and if you pass it, you get the college credit as if you sat through the entire 16-week course. So I CLEPed out of 21 units worth of exams of general ed studies, and the specific college that I chose accepted all of those units. Most colleges will only accept like a handful. This particular college, Thomas Edison State University, accepted all 33. So I took 21 out of 33 CLEP exams.
It's incredibly impressive. And just to level set again, because as you're going through your college degree career, you got your A at 18. 9/11 was when you're 7. You're a career coach now. So how old are you today? Just to give everybody perspective. Hate asking a lady, but I'm going to.
After the Marine Corps, I have no qualms about anything. I've been poked and prodded and asked my weight, my height. It's fine. I'm 30.
Okay. So good perspective there. And were you going to ask something, Natasha?
Yeah. And so during college, did you, or even high school, did you have any jobs or work before you entered the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so I was a piano teacher starting at age 13. I taught piano to, family, friends and whatnot. And that was kind of my little side business all throughout high school, which was really cool. And, kind of let me amass a large amount of cash because that's how I was paid. And, it helped pay for college. It helped pay for a trip to Europe kind of a thing. So, teaching piano was definitely great and gave me a good work ethic early on. And then later in high school, maybe early college, I was a waitress at Red Robin too. Yum. That was the extent of my corporate exposure prior to joining the Marine Corps. Like I said, I joined the Marine Corps when I was barely 20.
Yeah.
I didn't have much corporate experience before that.
Yeah, very young. And so I think I'd mentioned this when we were talking. So I met my wife in the Marine Corps. We served from 93 to 97. And I think the Marine Corps is made up of roughly 10% women, 90% male. So as you're making that decision and you're going in, are you having conversations with people? Or are there apprehensions? Like that's it's such a big step for anybody to go into the Marine Corps. But for a woman to make that decision, I can't put myself in your shoes, but it would seem like it would be a much bigger challenge when you think through all of the complexities, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, I think my mom in particular, had more qualms than I did. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, quite honestly. So my mom was in the Canadian Naval Reserves for a couple of years, I think 2 or 3 years. So she knew a lot more what I was walking into culture-wise, environment-wise, and what it's like to be a single woman, in a predominantly male environment, just with the politics and the harassment issues that tend to arise. And so I remember a very distinct conversation where, she told me, you have no idea what you're in for, and I don't think you should do this. And, quite naively, I told her, like, this is something I just feel like I have to do. And if I don't do it, I'll always regret it. And that part I still hold true to this day. I just wish that I had maybe talked to a few more people who were actually in the service, women in particular, so that I had an idea of what I was getting myself into. But even still, I don't know if that would have, dissuaded me from joining.
Well, and we're going to dive into this, and I know Tasha's going to have some different questions coming from a civilian perspective. And then obviously I serve, so my perspective is going to be different. You decided to go to officer school. So walk us through that. And then we're going to start diving into some of the leadership around this area, because it's massive once I give the civilian world a little bit of perspective on what it means and what you were doing.
Yeah. So my college was on a weird trimester system. So I actually graduated or finished all my coursework in February. I turned 20 in March, and I was at OCS by September.
And what is OCS for everybody that doesn't know?
Officer Candidate School. So I was shipped out to, Quantico, Virginia. That's where all officers are trained for 10 weeks. And at the end of 10 weeks, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps at the ripe old age of 20.
Yeah. And so for those who don't know, so Natasha, I'll explain a little bit.
I don't know.
So I was enlisted. So I had turned 19. I went in with the masses, and you can have, there's a ranking system for the enlisted, and then there's a ranking system for an officer. And so I may have been in for 5, 10, 15 years, and Talia can come in as right out of officer school, and I report to her, and I have to listen to her with zero military experience other than her 10 weeks. And she's taking on these seasoned Marines who possibly could have been through combat, but they've definitely led platoons and Marines. And you're walking into this. So this is a challenge. And as an enlisted person, I've been here 3-4 years. You're just walking into this. So walk us through what that leadership looks like and what you're doing. So on top of being a female, you're now walking in as the new person trying to lead Marines.
Yeah. It was incredibly humbling, I will say. So at the end of the 10 weeks of OCS, you then report to 6 months of the basic school, or TBS. And that's where men and women are essentially trained how to be infantry officers. So every officer in the Marine Corps gets the same standard of training as an infantry officer. And then from there, you go to your mission occupational specialty school, where you then further specialize. I believe one of my saving graces, even though it didn't feel like it at the time, was that I did not do well at the basic school. I was in the bottom third of my company. I did not do well socially at the basic school, partially, I think, being homeschooled and just being exposed to, sexual politics that I had not been exposed to before, being a little bit naive, being really young. I couldn't drink when I joined. So, my nickname was Baby Bastien, and that's how people knew me. So, I like to think that I failed pretty heavily early on in my career, at least in my peers, from their perspective. And I think that was my saving grace, because I walked out of TBS extremely humbled and ready to listen to people who had way more experience than I did, and who ultimately guided me. I asked a lot of questions, and I realized that the posturing that tends to happen within the officer community of having it all together and knowing the answers didn't serve me well. It didn't serve my peers well. And so I came out of TBS and into my first unit just really humble, I think, and, vulnerable and willing to ask my staff and CO, hey, what do I do here? Because I have no idea. And the thing is, they know it, you know it, and everyone pretends like it's not a thing. And it definitely is. So be willing to learn and acknowledge that the best leaders are first and foremost the best learners. And that, I think, was a big reason why in the long run, I think I had a successful career in the Marine Corps.
And do you think that staff NCO that you were assigned to or deployed with, it sounds almost like a mentor, but were you lucky in getting a partner that was open to work with you like that?
I was very lucky. And I think I was also lucky in terms of my MOS because I was an adjutant or manpower legal officer. So I worked on the command deck and reported directly to the CO or the XO. So the sergeant major at whatever unit I was at was really my mentor. I unfortunately did not have great experiences with my XOs. They were out on medical leave or, just transitioning in and out. So I never had a lot of continuity with my executive officer who would have otherwise been my mentor. So my mentors in the Marine Corps were senior enlisted. And I think that gave me an appreciation for the enlisted Marines that I worked for and who worked for me in a way that didn't jive well, quite honestly, with my other officer peers. I felt better understood by, and that I understood the enlisted Marines better than I did my own officer peers. And I think that was a hallmark of my career consistently with every unit that I went to.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely loving this conversation. I love all the terminology. Natasha,
I'm like, wow, I didn't know it could be such a foreign language. And my mind is kind of blown. So I hope I'm going to ask questions that are very, I don't know, hopefully you guys don't get offended or think I'm stupid, but questions. So you're going through this training with the idea they know, or everyone knows, right? You're going to be this officer. What are you learning? Like, you're going to come out and you're supposed to be this seasoned leader, or are you literally just teaching how to, I would say, maybe manage versus lead? Like, how, to me, I'm like, okay, 10 weeks and then 6 months. So they expect you to come out and just be, I think by nature, right? People are taught to respect, and you guys have these titles and roles, but is the expectation really that you're a leader at that point, or you're kind of in charge? Does that even make sense? I don't know.
No, it's a great question. And I apologize because, when you're in that environment, like the terms and the
no, please, no, it's okay. It's okay.
Second nature. So please have me translate. But they say that you come out as a leader, right? Officers are leaders. Everyone there is there to lead Marines. The reality is you don't know your head from your ass. That is the reality. And you're learning the rank structure. You're learning how to march or drill. You're learning basic rifle. You're shooting. You're learning very basic things in the 10 weeks. And then the 6 months, everyone gets the same standard of infantry training. So you're learning land navigation. You're learning how to call for fire. You're learning basic infantry maneuver tactics and skills. You're having ethics discussions, but you're not actually leading Marines, you're leading your peers. So they'll have like a company or a platoon structure, and then, people from within that platoon leading, and all with the idea that you should be practicing how to lead, your subordinate Marines. It's so much harder to lead your peers, in my opinion. And they will say that quite frankly. But no, I think you come out with just a very basic understanding of what the Marine Corps is. But just from my experience, I was pretty beaten down, both physically and mentally, after, 6 to 8 months of training. And I had no idea what it meant to be a leader, not in the real world, not with real people, not with real life experiences. That's something that I think, very much learn on the job. So
the experience,
not the crash course that you would think.
Did you have days where you're like, oh, this might not have been such a good idea?
Oh, every day for 6 months. remember I remember my roommate and I, because I went through the basic school, they call it Blizzard Bravo. So we were Bravo company, and we went through in December to June, I think, when you throw in the Christmas holiday block and whatnot. So it's freezing in Virginia. And I think that was the year too that they had like a snowmageddon of some kind. It was so cold. And I'm from California, so this is really my first East Coast experience. And we wake up and it's like -3 degrees outside. And I remember we looked at each other and we looked outside and we just saw how cold and dark it was. And we were like, what did we do? Like, why did we not just stay home with all of our friends and like get married and bake cookies? Like, not that that's very extreme, but like I remember saying that out loud to her. I was like, what did we do to get here? Like, and then she got hurt. So the injury factor is another psychological barrier as well, too. But yeah, I questioned it every day. And then there were also times where you look around and you're like, this is the best job I've ever had, right? So the polarity of it is just extreme on both sides.
Yeah, I think most Marines, enlisted or officer, or have those times, whether it's boot camp or what they're going through or they're shipped off. I went to Okinawa. I'm like, what am I doing here? And then I remember, or we remember, we're brainwashed pretty good that we're the baddest people on the planet, and there's a lot of pride in things that we do. So there is this polarity to it that is crazy. And every day that you're out of the Marine Corps, you forget how much you didn't like it and how much you loved it. And I was so excited to be there. The reality, it was not like that the whole time. It's a grind. So I had a couple questions, and I want to make sure we get to the rest of your career and get into leadership because it's very important. The Marine Corps is very important to a lot of people. And it wouldn't be fair if I didn't ask. So when I was in, harassment was a big deal. I saw it. It was very prevalent. There were always ways they're trying to manage it. I would assume that hasn't, I'm sure that's changed. I'm sure there's things that are in place, but how did you deal with, we don't have to get into details, but how did you deal with that aspect of the Marine Corps? Because it was prevalent when I was enlisted.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate you asking the question because not everybody does. So I think just acknowledging that it still exists and it's still extremely prevalent is kind of step one in continuing to build that awareness. From my experience and from my perspective, I can't imagine what it was like 20, 30, 40 years ago, because walking into it in 2013 was walking into a whole different world. I mean, it was probably within the first month of being at the basic school that I experienced my first incident of sexual harassment from a peer who was also college educated. So, it only escalated from there. And quite frankly, I've been harassed from senior enlisted. I've been harassed from fellow officers, from people I worked for, lieutenant colonels that I worked with. It's rampant up and down the chain of command. It doesn't matter. Yeah, I could tell some stories, but I don't know if this is the forum for that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you being so transparent, and it's a difficult conversation. So I guess my question to you is, how did you manage through it? Acknowledging that it's absolutely wrong, and I hope we can get better as a society, especially as a military. But how did you manage through it? Because if anything, someone's going to listen to this, or a Marine's going to listen to this, a WM, I don't know if they call it women Marine that anymore, but a female Marine is going to listen to this, and what can they take away? How did you get through it? And what advice would you have?
Yeah, I would say at first I did not handle it very well. I think it was such a culture shock from what I grew up with and what I was exposed to that I was very quiet and I just swallowed it a lot. And I didn't say anything and I didn't call the person out like I should have. I think the more experience I got, the more I grew in my own personal confidence. As I, started pinning on higher rank, I got a lot more salty. And I think the Captain Bastion that exited the Marine Corps was nowhere near the second lieutenant Bastion that joined. And I think that it was actually one of the reasons I got out, because I got so good at giving the zinger and the retort and just cutting them off at the knees with my mouth, right? Like I was so sassy. I should have been fired multiple times probably for my insubordination. But, I got so angry, I think, toward the end of my career that I could kind of look ahead and see, oh, I don't like who I'm becoming. I don't like the toll that this is taking on me. I don't like who I have to be in this environment. And it was a big contributor as to why I got out ultimately.
Wow.
Yeah. Difficult conversation. Do you regret going into the Marine Corps? Did that weigh that much on you?
I don't regret it. I don't like to think of, I don't like the idea of regret, to be honest, because I think that every experience creates who you are, right? So I can't say that I would like who I was without the Marine Corps because this is the only version of myself that I know now. And I'm proud of who I am now. I've done a lot of work to get to be this person and this version of me now. So, my experience in the Marine Corps was great in a lot of ways. It taught me how to be confident. It taught me how to fake a confidence I didn't necessarily feel in any given moment. It taught me how to lead, how to be the only woman at the table, how to articulate myself, how to comport myself. It paid for grad school. Like, there were a lot of good things that came out of the Marine Corps. And there were a lot of really awful things that came out of the Marine Corps. So I can't say that I regret it. I can only say that I like the version of who I am now. And the Marine Corps is a part of that story.
Good. I
like it. Can I ask you some questions? So I know on top of the sexual harassment and that dynamic between men and women, just in general, from a leadership perspective, you're in a position where 90% of who you're working with is men. I'm sure there's a lot of people that were older than you, more experienced. So what was that like? How did you it sounds like you grew in your confidence and learning there, but being a leader in that situation is tough. I've, from my side, thinking about just, there's this thing with age that people like, oh my gosh, you're younger, right? You can't possibly teach me anything. And so it's just a really tough spot, and you had more than one. So anything there of how you grew, maybe how did you grow most in the situations where you're leading older people or men or whoever it might be?
I think the biggest thing that I learned is everyone is broken in their own unique way. So even back at the basic school, I used to joke that the chair in my barracks room was a therapy chair, even back then, right? It was like signaling to my current career path. But because I'd have my peers, like grown men, sitting there crying over some heartbreak that they were experiencing, or their mom was sick, or, it just taught me that behind the veneer, behind the oorah, semper fi, semper gumby, rah, 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 like everyone is just uniquely broken in their own way. And I always tried to lead with vulnerability and authenticity. And I got in trouble for it a couple times, quite honestly. Other officer peers of mine, or even my superiors, would tell me, you're too familiar with your Marines, like you're laughing with them too much, essentially. Or, unfortunately, I experienced a suicide with one of my Marines. Mm-hmm. And the way that I handled that, and the way I tried to be there for my Marines, who knew this person, who passed, unfortunately, I was criticized for that. And I never really paid any attention to it, because I knew in my heart of hearts, like, that was the leadership style that was authentic to me. That's what made me successful. And I'm still in touch with most, if not all, of my Marines that I worked with. And I think that that is the testament to true leadership. And it's funny, I told my last CO, I said, sir, with all due respect, I'm a terrible officer. I am. I fully own it. I don't care. I don't care about the things that the Marine Corps needs me to care about. And that's why I'm getting out. But I am a good leader. And I think that there is a distinction between being a manager, being an officer, and being a leader. And those two things in my mind are very, very different.
Yeah, and I'll just add, and Natasha, it'll resonate in a different way, but Talia, those are the officers that we would follow, that the enlisted would follow. You're the one that we would want to get behind and go into battle and do those things, because it was so familiar and part of the family versus, the cookie cutter officer that was, reading to us out of the book, which we knew we could read inside and out. So, right. Yeah, I appreciate that type of leadership just coming from, enlisted guy. So I want to be sensitive to time and appreciate everything that you went through in the Marine Corps and everything you did. Absolutely love it, with all the semper fis and oorahs. So take us through transitioning out into the civilian world, and take us through what you went through and then how you got to what you're doing today.
Yeah, great question. So my last unit was embedded as part of the NSA, it's the National Security Agency. So I worked for an intelligence unit and had a very fancy clearance as a result of that. So I got out on very good terms compared to where most Marines, if not most of my officer peers, would have been. I had a high clearance. I worked at a prestigious three-letter agency in the DC area. So I was very fortunate in that aspect. A lot of the people that I was working with, were in and out of the Pentagon and Quantico, which are both hubs of, activity. So thankfully, my transition out of the military was incredibly seamless. I had a job offer from General Dynamics that ultimately I turned down to work for someone who had their own business, someone who I had worked with on the green side, who had their own company. And I essentially transitioned right into a role that I had been doing on the active duty side. I was just now doing it as a government contractor. So like a lot of people do in the DC Beltway area, I transitioned into consulting for the government. I was a project manager. I got my project management professional certification. I was very much on track to go that route. And I enjoyed it to an extent. I mean, it was definitely anxiety inducing coming out of the military. I remember that first week did not go so well. Just in terms of culture shock, I had to rein in my mouth, right? Like my swearing and all of that. That was an adjustment.
Surprise.
Yes, I learned very quickly. But ultimately it was a very smooth transition. And I'm so grateful for all the people who are around me because I know that is not most people's experiences. So I am very cognizant of that. Thankfully, I fell right into a very great company. It was a small consulting firm and kind of worked my way up through that. Ultimately, I became the director of program management. So I was overseeing multiple project managers and their projects and their contracts for the government.
And how old are you at this time?
So I transitioned out in 2019. So I was 26 at that point.
So 26, you're director, running projects with multiple people, overachiever once again.
Once again, yeah.
I would expect nothing less from a Marine. And the reason why I bring that up is as we have these conversations, and like I said, we joke, this is Grandpa and the Millennial, but the different perspectives. There are people out there at 26 that are doing what you were doing, but there's not that many. Most 26-year-olds are figuring out what they want to do with their life, or they just graduated. So you're in this role. Again, Natasha brought it up. You probably have people that you're managing that are older than you. Very, very interesting. And so are you applying your Marine Corps leadership, and are you now learning, you have to be learning civilian leadership and the difference?
Yes, specifically how to work with civilians in the government. Super fun. You can have a whole separate podcast about that. Yeah, it was, unfortunately, I will say the Marine Corps is 20 years behind corporate America, and the government is 40 years behind corporate America in terms of their processes, in terms of the bureaucracy, and things move very, very slowly. So I think there was a big disparity between the operational tempo that I was used to running at within the military, all the ideas that I had as a consultant, and then the implementation, trying to get these ideas across the finish line within the federal government provoked a lot of frustration for me personally and for my team, who were also comprised of all former military, former Marines. So, learning the art of negotiation, having to explain and over-explain oneself, to various clients and stakeholders, it definitely taught a lot of patience and gave me an appreciation, I guess, for the long game and the small win. But I think, leadership is leadership wherever you go. And I think bringing with me that authenticity and that vulnerability, I'm a big believer in that. And I think that the issues that I saw, within the federal government, all back to a lack of transparency, which is a lack of vulnerability, went to a lack of authenticity in terms of, on the personal and the professional side. So it was kind of the same pattern, just repeating in a different environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And so take us through, you're a director at this time. So take us through how did you get to where you're at today in the consulting and career coach business?
Yeah. So the part of that story that's interesting is even though I fell into a great job with a great company. I loved the management team and all my coworkers. The work itself just wasn't fulfilling. Part of what I had to do as the director of program management is I was also working with the business development team in writing, RFIs and RFPs, for contracts with the government, right? This was part of how we sustain ourselves as a business. And it involved writing 50 plus page IT contracts. I have no background in IT. This is like information that I've picked up from, the developers that I've worked with. And it all kind of came to a head. I was facilitating a meeting between our developers and our, the stakeholders. I was a translator essentially. And I found myself speaking for probably 5 minutes, and every word that came out of my mouth, I was like, how do I know this? Why do I know this? It was just like this existential, like, WTF moment. What am I doing? And I realized, I was so unhappy doing this work. And I realized if I wasn't careful, this was going to become my niche area. This was going to become how I market myself in corporate America, right? Because I've been at this job now a couple of years, and I just wasn't happy. I had such a sense of dread, logging into my laptop every morning. And I was so fortunate to work from home during the pandemic and, thereafter. So I had amazing benefits and an amazing work from home setup, but I just could not get over the impending sense of dread that I felt every single morning. And I'll never forget my manager at the time. He's the COO. He's like, during one of our performance reviews, he goes, do you get excited to come to work every day? Because he loved tech. And he's like, do you get excited to come to work every day? And I kind of, shuffled my way around the question. I was like, I love who I work with. It's a resounding no. And I knew that something had to change. And I didn't know, I was back at square one. I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And that kind of prompted a very long soul search that ultimately resulted in me finding coaching. And that in and of itself is a whole story. But
I was going to say, what's the soul search? Everyone's looking for the answer to that question. So what, anything that kind of pointed you in that direction?
So I think the biggest thing that helped me, and I tell this to my clients, is you have to let go of the box. And what I mean by the box is society has all these categories of industries and things and labels that you're supposed to neatly fit into, right? So if you want to become a lawyer, there's this box. And if you want to be a scientist, there's this box. And, there's all these neat little boxes. And I kept trying to figure out what box I wanted to fit myself into. And finally, I was like, you know what? Screw the boxes. What do I want? And I literally just sat and journaled one morning all the things that my ideal job would have. I would work this many hours and I would make this amount of money and I would travel this amount of, this amount per year. And I would have a podcast and I would speak on podcasts and I would write and I would make content and I would, help people. And I just went and it filled an entire notebook page of stuff, like just qualities that I wanted in my job. And I just looked at that every single day for probably 6 months. And I thought about it and I didn't think of an industry. I didn't think of a title. I just looked at that list and I started talking about it to people. And ironically, a couple months later, I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's a psychologist. And I was telling her how unhappy I was in my job. And she said to me, I feel like you would just be a really good executive coach. And I was like, great, what is that? And that kind of prompted a whole research, deep dive into the world of coaching. I'd never heard of it before outside of like a sports context, had no idea it existed as a career option. And the more I researched, the more I realized, oh my gosh, this aligns with every single thing that I want on this list, on this notepad list. And that got me excited. And I just had a sense of knowing the same way I knew back when I wanted to join the Marine Corps, that's what I had to do. I had that same knowing. And so, I looked into accredited programs. I signed up for one. It was a 6 to 9 month program, depending on how fast you wanted to work. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with the process. I fell in love with how different it is as a modality from therapy and consulting. And it's just uniquely tailored to every person that you talk to. And my initial plan was to build my practice concurrent, and alongside my corporate job. And it was so interesting, the energy drain from the corporate job left nothing for the practice. And I was getting very frustrated at the lack of momentum. And thankfully, my husband is an incredibly supportive human and partner. And he was like, you just need to go for it. You need to pull the plug. You need to go for it. My family, my brother had just become an entrepreneur a few months earlier. He's like, you just got to make the jump. You just got to make the jump. I promise it's so much better on the other side.
Aww.
And I was like, I'm so scared to do this. And quite honestly, it was the most terrifying thing I've ever done. Joining the Marine Corps included.
Wow.
Because it required me to let go of the title and the prestige and the overachiever and the performance mindset. And what if I fail? And I'm a Marine officer. People have expectations of me. Like all these narratives that I had in my head, I had to let it go and start from scratch. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done because, like I said, I've been working since I was 13. And the first few months of my practice, I was making less money than what I made working as a piano teacher when I was 13. Talk about humbling.
Yeah. So did you just walk away? So walk us through that. You walk us through the transition. Was it just one day I quit?
I mean, it had been building up for probably 9 months, but essentially, yes, I turned in my 2 weeks notice and I sat down at my desk after the 2 weeks after I'd quit my job and I was like, okay, Googling how to file an LLC. That is where I started.
So you started from scratch. No clients, anything.
No clients, no social media, nothing. It was purely a leap of faith.
Okay. So, and we hear this with other business owners we talk to, and that leap of faith is just prevalent. Tell us how you get this business up and running and what you do and how you impact people. And then we'll jump into some of the leadership principles.
Yeah. So it has evolved and changed so much just since I've started, which has been almost a year. It'll be a year in September. And quite honestly, when I started, I just knew that I wanted to do life coaching. I wanted to help people. I was very clear on that, but I was so broad in my niche. And thankfully, I worked with a business coach who told me, you have to niche down to your target market until it hurts, which as a new coach, you want to help everybody. And so I had a really hard time pinpointing the big bucket area that I wanted to work in, whether it's relationships, career, personal development, finances. And then from there, niche down to my ideal client avatar. Like, who do I actually want to help? So there was definitely some ebb and flow along the way. But ultimately, my ideal client found me. I was starting to put out content and I was starting to talk about things that I was passionate about. And I had the opportunity to work with a former Marine colonel who had, kind of had a similar story as me. He was very successful within the DC circuit, had kind of reached a point in his career that he wasn't happy and didn't know what he wanted to do next. And through the work that we did together, he identified this dream that he had had for 20 years and had never really articulated it to anyone. He just told himself that it couldn't happen for XYZ reasons. And watching the journey that he went through helped me so much. And I don't even think he realizes it unless he listens to this podcast. But I don't think he realized how much that ministered to me because it gave me clarity in terms of what I wanted to do and the messaging that I wanted to give to other people. So that's when I realized I want to help veterans. I want to help veterans who have turned corporate professional, not necessarily who have transitioned directly out of the military, because I think there's a lot of stress and anxiety around that time. And you just want to land on your feet. You're not thinking like 10 years down the road at that point. You just want to survive. But kind of those phase 2 transitioners who have already, had maybe a couple of years in the civilian sector are maybe a little bit burnt out or just tired of the hamster wheel, the rat race, whatever rodent analogy you'd like, and are looking for something different, looking for something more fulfilling, and they don't know what that thing is. And that's my insert point. Those are the people that I want to help because they are ready to start doing the introspective work of finding clarity, finding their courage, figuring out what their passion is instead of leaning into what they feel they should want for their life because of what the Marine Corps said or what society has told them their whole life.
Yeah, I wish I would have known you, 20 years ago when I was going through that. You're running a business and obviously, when you're working with your clients, you have programs and processes. Can you share with us some of what that looks like? I don't want you to give anything away for free by any means, but what is someone coming to you? What are they getting? How are you supporting them? What does it look like?
So in the work that I've done, I've come to realize that there's only two reasons why people don't go after their pipe dream. Either they have a lack of clarity around what it is that they're supposed to do, or they know what it is that they're supposed to do, and they just don't know how. They don't know where to start, or they're too afraid. They're too afraid to make that leap to start. And there's a lot of internal work that goes into figuring out why both of those questions exist, right? The clarity piece and the courage piece. So what my program does is we pull all of it apart. I want to know who you think you are, right? Because our identity is not who we are, it's who we perceive ourselves to be. It's a product of the labels and the experiences that we've lived through our whole life. So pulling that apart and being like, who are you? Who do you actually want to be? Is who you are, who you perceive yourself to be today, is that true? Right? Is that an identity that you want to take forward with you? We talk about, what are the passions that may have died on the vine as you've matured through adulthood and life has just thrown, stressors and problems in your pathway, things that you've had to solve for, right? But what did the 12-year-old version of you want to be? What did the 20-year-old version of you want to be? And ironically, people know the answer to that question so much faster than you think. They know, because it never leaves you. Whether you have a dream at 6, it doesn't change when you're 60. It's still there, and it's there for a reason. So uncovering that and giving people the permission to experience that. So we do a lot of work on that. And then also, what is our relationship to money? The financial security is a huge piece as to why people don't actually go after their dream. Is there a way that we can pivot responsibly given the non-negotiables in your life? And then we take a look at courage, which is, not the absence of fear, but moving forward with the fear. One of the things that I talk about in a lot of my videos is people always say, I just wish I had the confidence. I wish I had the confidence to go after my dream. Like, you don't need confidence, you need courage. And then you need commitment, and then you need competence, and then confidence ensues. I think Frank Kern actually came up with that 4C model. So people have it all backwards. They're afraid to fail. Why are you afraid to fail? What is it specifically that you're afraid of? Most people actually can't articulate it. It's just this nebulous gray cloud of fear in the back of their head. Like, what if I fail? What if someone sees me fail? Let's spell out your failure. Part of my program is writing out what I call the colossal failure plan, right? If everything falls apart, what are you going to do? Let's solve for X in advance, right? And what you start to realize is the thing you're afraid of doesn't actually exist. The probability of it occurring is extremely low. And just sometimes seeing that on paper is enough to give our brain like a minute to just relax and to say, okay, I've got a plan in place. If this happens, which is very unlikely, I know what I'm going to do. And I've already talked about it with my spouse and my kids and my friends and right? Like, we bring people into our team and it starts to grow. So that's a lot. I
love it. Can I ask, so is there, for your specific audience, so veterans, is there a particularly hard part about coaching to that, or maybe just anything reoccurring with that cohort, I guess, that's difficult in leadership or coaching?
The performance aspect. Marines in particular, but I think really any military service member, we've been taught that our value is derived from our performance. And letting go of that mindset is the singular factor to experiencing life as you want it to be, right? When you let go of the fear of failure, when you let go about the title and the money and what other people think about you, right? That's the hang up for everybody, especially military, because like me, you're used to overachieving and performing and everybody going, wow, Talia has it all together. Wow. Natasha, she's so amazing. Anthony, oh my gosh, so successful. And you internalize that, whether you realize it or not, you internalize people's praise and you think like, oh my gosh, could I actually live without it? Like, what if these people laugh at me? What if they see my business fail, right? So working through the performance piece, which is really just a narrative that we have in our head. It's not even real. Most people don't even care about you, right? Like that's
Yeah.
that's the that's the key to unlocking your potential.
That is very true. And so with the Marines or any military, it's any military, but I'll use the Marines. How much ego gets in the way for when you're coaching? How much of our ego do you have to work through?
Oh, 100% of it. And the irony is, as that trust and vulnerability is established through multiple sessions, the walls start to come down. But I can't tell you how many discovery calls I have with former military, now professionals. They tell me what their sales quota was for that year, right? They tell me how much money they're making. They tell me that they were just recently promoted and that they're part of the P Club, and, just accolade after accolade after accolade. And I'll politely listen for a time, and inevitably I'll always interrupt them mid-sentence and be like, okay, I've heard you. I don't care about your career. Tell me what you want. And it shocks them. It's like as if someone took a defibrillator to the system, because in society, we applaud that. We applaud the accolades. We applaud the performance. And when someone comes in and says, point blankly, I don't care about your career. I don't care about your accolades. Tell me what you want. It's jolting. And there's inevitably a pause. And then they tell you, actually, what I really want is to open up a barbecue food truck in my community. Actually, what I really want is to open up a homeless shelter and run a homeless shelter with my wife. Actually, I've wanted to always open up like my own photography business. It comes out. It all comes out. Like it's the thing behind the thing. That's what we're coaching.
Yeah, I absolutely love it as well. And I want to spend, these hours go so fast, but I also, one, thank you for what you're doing, working with veterans. I absolutely love it. Tell us about your leadership principles and what you're teaching and what's near and dear to your heart. If you have, 3 that we could talk about, 3 takeaways as far as leadership, what would those be?
I think, I feel like I've said it a lot in this hour, but learning to lead with vulnerability and authenticity. Authenticity being who you truly are, and vulnerability being that you're willing to talk about it, that you're willing to show the emotion, that you're willing to sit with people in the space that they're in, both on the professional side, but also on the personal side, right? So when something sucks, calling out that it sucks, because you're not doing any favors to your team, to your Marines, to your service members, by pretending that it's anything other than what it is, and by pretending that you're something other than what you are. And if you have to wear your rank or you have to throw around your title, in my view, you're not a good leader at all, because leadership it requires no explanation. People just can't even articulate it. They just know that's a leader. So that would be my first thing. I think the second thing is be a better learner than you are a leader, right? Like constantly asking questions. Why is this the way that it is? Says who? That was one of my favorites in the Marine Corps. Like, this is the way it is. Like, says who? That's why I wasn't a very good captain.
Chesty Polar. That's why.
But that's why I got out as a captain. Probably my days were numbered. Curiosity. Why is it that someone is showing up late consistently? It's not that they're a bad employee. It's not that they're a bad person. Is there something else going on behind the scenes that you're just not aware of? I can't tell you how many mitigating circumstances I've learned of just by asking questions. And I feel like in the fast-paced world that we live in, people don't really take the time to understand the context of what's actually happening. So I'd say curiosity and being a better learner than you are a leader is another thing. And then I think the third thing, and this is probably counterintuitive to a lot of people, is can you have fun? Like leadership has this very heavy, businessy, serious executive connotation to it. And I think leadership is likability in a lot of ways, like you don't have to be a court jester, but can you crack a joke and just be a normal human? Can you be sarcastic? Can you sit with your Marines while they're drinking their energy drinks and, join in on whatever it is that they're saying? Because that's how camaraderie is built. So the humor is camaraderie in my view. And I think that work would just be a much better place to exist in if people just brought a sense of humor to it, because life is funny and people are funny. So.
Absolutely. Not always the Marine Corps humor. Some of that's a little dark, but humor,
Very dark.
but humor for sure.
So I have one more question on your coaching. So I think in leadership and leaders, like you said, that are like really deeply devoted to growing as a leader and learning and doing all of that, there's kind of this, I'll say, blanket leadership where you for general purposes, right, you can be a leader in most situations. And then I think there's an aspect of leadership that's really the one-to-one, who you're leading or who your leader is. And there's I think the deeper, like, meaningful thing. So in your situation with coaching, I'm sure not all the people that do those discovery calls with you are, you're probably like, yeah, I don't know if I'm the one for you. Or sometimes they might not think you're the coach for them, right? And it's not that you don't have the ideas or whatever, but any thoughts on how somebody should pick their coach, and then maybe how you pick who you want to coach or can coach?
Yeah. Well, one, I think walking into a potential coaching relationship with a coachable mindset is a huge thing, because some people want to be changed in spite of themselves, and that's never going to work. It never works out well for anybody. So coming in with a coachable mindset and a teachable spirit, ultimately, I think is a huge thing. And yeah, absolutely. Like, a coaching relationship is very vulnerable. It's similar to therapy in that aspect. Coaching tends to be more future focused and goal oriented, whereas therapy is, looking into past hurts and understanding the why. So different modalities there, but it's a very intimate relationship. And I think, given the fact that I'm a veteran, given the fact that I'm a female, people open up to me very much so very early on, because of the camaraderie with the military, but also because I'm a female. I don't think they feel as threatened by me the way they would feel by maybe a male coach who is military. And the chemistry.
We have that problem sometimes at work, Anthony. That's why I'm here to, soften it up. I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
No, 100%. So, the chemistry has to be there, and the flow has to be there. And it won't be there with everyone, but especially if you're looking to pick your coach, you want somebody who understands to an extent, what it is that you're going through, someone that you feel can hold you accountable, someone, and a lot of this is negotiated too as you continue the coaching relationship. And if you're working with a good coach, they should be asking you, how do you like to be held accountable? How do you like to be checked? Giving the client the permission to push back. That's a big part of the journey as well. And then, for me, I don't work with people who are looking for a quick fix. I absolutely refuse to work with people who are looking for a quick fix or who are looking for a deal. And unfortunately, there is a lot of that. Like, here's a pill and take this pill and it'll make me feel better. And this is the deep work. This is the stuff that most people go their whole lives without addressing. And there is no quick fix. You just have to, muddle through the mog, as it were. And yeah, so as a coach, I think it's important to know what are your non-negotiables and the clients that you are and are not willing to service, because it is a very intimate relationship. And as a coach, we're trained to not get in the box, as they say, with the client, but you do take on a lot of their emotions. And coaches are supposed to have coaches for that very reason, so that you can process and, show up for your clients as the best version of who you are. And you can't do that without a team of people around you.
Well, you're a coach, you're a therapist, you're a leader, all in one.
Yeah.
I have a staple question that I'm going to ask. It doesn't have really anything to do with leadership, more inspiration. But if you could talk to anybody, have one more conversation with somebody, alive or dead, so maybe someone I lost contact with or someone who's passed away, who would it be and why?
Oh, gosh, there are so many people. The work that I do with coaching and just the mindset work, because a lot of it is your mindset and how you approach things. I would love to talk to Tony Robbins or to Oprah, one of the two. I respect both of them so much in so many different ways. I respect Tony Robbins in the sense that he was doing this back when this was wackadoodle. Like he built an empire helping people and inspiring people at a time when all of this was considered just absolutely crazy. And while I may not agree with everything that he says and everything that he does, I do have a lot of respect. And the same for Oprah. I think that what she has done as a woman of color in the era that she grew up in, the empire that she built, again, by asking questions and being really good at what she did and letting go of the outcome. If you listen to a lot of her interviews, she talks about letting go of the outcome and just focusing on making the next right decision. And unfortunately, with social media, I think there's this tendency to compare yourself to where other people are at, and to get discouraged very easily. And if you can just, what I'm learning is if you can just let go of the outcome and move forward, taking that next right step, that is success. Success is the journey, not the destination.
I have a feeling that you're going to get your dream to talk to one of them someday. You are an overachiever. Natasha, do you want to ask your staple question?
Well, normally my staple question is, what would you tell your 30-year-old self? But you are 30, as am I. So maybe I'll switch it up. So you're talking to your 50-year-old self. Where do you, or maybe you're watching yourself. So what's the dream at 50? Where do you hope you are?
Oh, you're asking me to call my shot.
That's a big one. Don't worry. Thinks the journey changes.
Yeah, I would say at this point in my life, I would love to be a published author. I would love to just talk to as many people as I can because I'm so passionate about this. I read this book called The Path or The Pathway, and it talked about, what is your life's mission statement? And I truly believe that inspiring people and empowering them to make their career their calling, if more people did that, we could elevate the standard for humanity. I feel like we are still living in such a post-World War II survivalist era that's centered on security and stability. And with the technology that we have available, the opportunities that we have with the internet and just technology, all of it, there's so much more opportunity, and people are still living, in my mind, in the dark ages, and we don't have to stay there. There's so many possibilities, like it's limitless. So, that's what I would hope, is that I get to talk to as many people, if it's hundreds, if it's thousands, I don't care. I just want to talk to people and encourage them. Like, you don't have to do something you don't love anymore. Maybe that was what our grandparents had to do and their grandparents had to do. And I even say that with a grain of salt, because how many success stories have we heard from previous generations who overcame insurmountable odds to make their dream come true? I think that it's a mindset. I don't think it's about circumstances. I really do. And so, yeah, I just want that opportunity to talk to as many people as I can. Someone called me a dog with a bone recently, and I was like, it's because I'm so passionate about this. Like, if you were passionate about something, you'd be a dog with a bone too. So yeah, that's my hope, is when I'm 50, is I can look back and be like, you know what? I helped a lot of people and had a lot of fun doing it.
I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And it's going to dovetail really well into our inspiration. But before we go into our inspirations, Talia, I just wanted to say thank you so much for the time today. And thank you for your service. Appreciate everything you did in the Marine Corps. Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners we have with? Any parting words before we do our inspires?
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for having me. This has been so cool to get to know you guys. And Anthony, thank you for your service. Natasha, thank you for bringing the millennial perspective to leadership. I appreciate it. The world needs more of it. And I just wish you both all the success with your podcast. Yeah, and to future listeners, future listeners, because they're not listening yet. I would just say, do the hard work. Don't be afraid to do the hard work, because it's going to be that hard work that ultimately leads to growth. And in the words of Tony Robbins, you are either growing or you're dying, and you get to choose.
I love it. Well, before we do our Inspire, I have to say thank you as well. I always am so excited for our listeners to get to hear something from everybody, but the conversations are always, this is why we're doing it. It's fulfilling. So being able to listen to your story and have you share your insights, and a lot of what you said resonates so much with me. So I just appreciate, one, for my own, I always am over here taking a lot of notes. Normally Anthony will make fun of me for it, but just really, really appreciate your time, your service, your story. And thank you so much. It's truly inspirational, and this is exactly why we're doing this. So I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you.
All right, so we are going to do our Inspire. So I'm going to read mine first, Talia. And if you're not on our Facebook page, I don't know if you're on Facebook. Some millennials are not, but that's where we do our Inspires. So I'm going to read this one from this week, and then Natasha will go, and then we'll have you go, Talia. So this one's actually from my wife to her best friend, who I know really well. Her husband's one of my best friends, Michelle Bradley. So she said, "My Inspire Thursday is my very dear friend, Michelle Bradley. From both of us serving in the Marine Corps to teaching fitness classes together to having kids close to the same ages, and so much more in common. She's been there for me for the last 20 years and is 100% real. She's an inspirational mother, stepmother, wife, daughter, worker, and friend. We've had some crazy times together, and I can't wait for more. Love you, girl." So I know her. They're both two crazy Marines. They're a lot of fun.
I love that you read the last sentence there. Love you, girl. Got it on record. Okay, I'll go into mine. So mine was posted by Jessica Benoist. She writes, also, I think we have a trend here of best friends. Jessica writes, "My Inspired Thursday today is my best friend since 5th grade, Marissa Carmazzi. She has been my rock throughout all of middle school and high school and now college. While we may drift apart because of our busy lives, we always know that we will have each other no matter what. She is such a kind, loving, creative, and fun person. I love her with all of my heart and feel so grateful to have her in my life." Love a good best friendship. So thank you, Jessica, for sharing. And Talia, awesome. What about you? What or who is your Inspire?
I would say my Inspire is one of my very dear friends, Angela Savino. She's also a Marine captain. I think she's about to promote to major here soon, but she is a dear friend of mine and someone whose work ethic is just absolutely inspiring. I hope she listens to this, but she's been through a lot in her life. She's been through a lot in her career as a Marine. She was a lawyer in the military, and she worked on a lot of very tough cases. She's always championed other women in a service where that is not always the case. She has pushed through so much in terms of her mental resiliency, her personal life, her personal resiliency, just in all aspects. I feel she is such an inspiration to so many, myself, and just in how she shows up and leads other people in her daily life. So yeah, she would be my inspiration. And Ange, if you're listening, I love you.
Well, thank you.
I love it. Sorry, my laptop died. I think I'm still on audio, though.
Yeah, you're still on audio.
Sorry.
Talia, that was incredible. Thank you for sharing that. And she can definitely going to hear this, because I'm going to send you the link and you can forward it to her.
Absolutely.
And we're going to do my best to blow it up all over the Marine Corps pages. So again, I just wanted to say thank you. Natasha's going to close this out, and then we'll get this released this week.
Sounds great.
All right. Gramps, Millennial, and Talia out.